Hi, here's a little help for those who want to be more creative in their writing. I'll start by sharing my screen and I will give you a few tips on how you can improve your creative writing skills. Okay, so the topic that we're doing today is creative writing, learning how to make your writing more interesting. Because the more creative you are, the more interesting your writing will be, and the more interested your readers will be to read what you are writing. What is creative writing? It is the ability to make your writing more creative. It allows you to express yourself better. You can just let your thoughts flow. This will help your readers to enjoy your writing more. It will make your explanation of events more vivid, more clear, and enjoyable. Understand the basics of creative writing. So, what are the main points that you need to keep in mind if you want to be creative in your writing? Every good story must have, first of all, a theme, a good theme. Okay? There can be different themes in a story. For example, you can have power and corruption, like in the story The Lord of the Rings. I'm sure most of you have read that story. You could have love and faith, like in Romeo and Juliet. You can have crime and punishment, or innocence, like in the story To Kill a Mockingbird. You could have courage and fear, like in the Red Badge of Courage. You could have the theme of peace and war, like War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, a very famous story. Or maybe survival, like in The Life of Pi. You could have love and loss, as in The Notebook. And you could have science and technology, like in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, one of my favorites. And there are so many more themes that you could have. So, if you are going to write a story, you need to first choose a theme, something that you like. If you like romance, you go for that. If you like crime and punishment, you take that as your theme. You can have a different theme for each story. You don't have to have the same theme for each and every story that you write. The second point to keep in mind is the time and location. When you write a story, it has to be set in a particular setting. For example, you choose a geographical location. If you choose, say, India as your geographical location, the setting of your story, then you should know a little, just a background of what India is like. Maybe the culture, mm, the weather, the kind of trees, the language spoken by the people, what the people are like, a little bit about it. So you could read a little about the place and then use that in your story. It makes things more realistic and more interesting. Even if you're writing fiction or non-fiction, whether it is fiction or non-fiction, you still need to choose a time and location, a setting for your story. You can also include culture. You can include a historical period. For example, like I said, if you chose to write about India, you can write about the geographical features, about the people. You can choose one particular historical period, maybe the time when the British ruled India, something like that. You can choose to write about the geography and or choose one particular one particular year and write about that. Then the third part, the plot, which includes the sequence of events. The plot is very important. You have to be able to let the plot flow consistently. If there is a break somewhere, then your reader is going to lose connection between the first part and the second part of your story. So it has to be a complete flow of events and an interesting flow of events so that it keeps your readers engaged completely. Okay. The fourth part is exploration of the character. You have to have a character, you not just one character. In a story, you would probably have at least two characters. That is the protagonist and the antagonist. The protagonist is the main character, usually person who does good, and the antagonist is opposite, the villain in the story. These two definitely do exist in a story. And apart from them, you could have the deuteragonist, which is second in command to the protagonist. You can have love interest. What is love interest? Love interest is the character that the protagonist will fall in love with in your story. Doesn't have to be there. I'm just saying these are the additional characters that you could have in your story. You could also have tertiary characters. There can be so many more characters in your story. Animals could be part of your story. Non-living things could be part of your story. It could be anything, but you have to have characters. You have to have characters that your readers can connect with. It should be an interesting character, and you have to describe that character in such a way that your reader wants to follow everything the characters are doing, where he's going, what he's doing. The reader will experience everything that the character experiences through your eyes. Okay? The fifth part is conflict and drama. Drama has to be there. Okay? Um, if you don't have conflict, it's not going to be interesting. There has to be a fight somewhere, an argument somewhere, something going wrong in your story. And then the drama comes in where the protagonist is trying to solve the problem, and then in the bargain, he might fall in love with another character. And there might be a love triangle, there might be anything that goes on in a story. But without conflict and drama, there isn't really much to a story. So you must try and include that as well. These are the basics of your story. So when you write a story, try and have all this together before you begin. Then you pick a topic. Find a topic that interests you. It could be drama, romance, horror, science fiction, anything you want. Drama like Much Ado About Nothing, Romeo and Juliet, these are all dramas, where a lot of things happen and you are completely engrossed in the story. You can have romance, like again, Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is a drama and a romance. Romance meaning one person falling in love with another. It can end well, it can end badly too, depends on you, you're the writer. You can have horror, like in The Abandoned Asylum or The Organ Thieves. Make up your own horror story and make it so compelling that the reader's hair stands on end. Okay, give that kind of description. You can have science fiction like Fever, one of my favorites again, or 30 Seconds to Earth. You can create something of your own. Sci-fi is vast. You can take any topic you want and develop into whatever you want. Once you have picked what theme you want to work on, you have a general idea of what you're going to write about, you just start writing. Many people say that you need to have a draft before you start writing, but I somehow don't work that way. I have never been able to keep to a draft. Even when I was forced to write a draft, I would write it. But when I wrote my actual story, it would be very different from the draft. So I realized that draft writing was not for me. It may help you. You may be good at writing a draft and keeping to it when you write a story, but not everyone is like that. For example, I'm not like that. I cannot be restricted to a draft. What happens with me is when I write, my thoughts just flow and take a different turn sometimes. I might plan to write something and then I end up writing something else. My thoughts flow as I'm writing. I cannot work with a draft. So find something that suits you. If you can work with a draft, go for it. And if you can't, don't worry about it. Just let your thoughts flow. So let your thoughts flow without any restrictions. Some people recommend that you plan the entire story before you start writing, but you do not need to do that, like I told you. Let your thoughts take you in any direction you like, and you will end up with something spectacular. Focus on the main character or the characters. Your readers will want to connect with the main character. Keep that in mind. A reader wants to feel what the character feels and go where the character goes and experience everything that the character is experiencing. So make your character so phenomenal that the reader will be interested. The reader will want to be in the character's shoes. Add vivid descriptions. Describe a place, describe people, events, because they help the readers to connect better with what's happening in your story. If you just write, this happened in this place, it's not going to be interesting. You have to name that place, you have to describe it. If you're talking about a person, you describe that person so vividly that nothing is left to imagination. The reader will read everything and imagine it in his mind. What kind of clothes that person was wearing, what kind of hair he had, how he smelt, how he walked, everything. You know, every person has a distinct walk. Even if you're watching someone in the dark and he's walking down a street, you will know who that person is just by knowing his walk. So everything is distinct to a person. When you're writing, keep these things in mind. So if you were describing a person, you could say something like a person that he was agile, attentive, bold. You can describe his style, his physical appearance, his clothes. Like you can say, I'm giving you an example. He was attentive. He had the kindest blue eyes set in a round face. He wore a tall hat and a grey waistcoat. He walked with a slight limp. Okay? Something like that. And if you're describing a place, you will first just describe it in general. Say the first thing that strikes you. For example, if you go to a new place for the first time, what is it that strikes you about that place? Focus on that first. After that, you can highlight smaller details about the place to draw the reader's attention to a particular part of that place. And then you make that place come to life, make it interesting. For example, I could say something like this. There were not many people on the roads that morning. This is a broad perspective. I'm looking at all the roads. Okay. And I continue by saying, I looked around and saw a small coffee shop at the corner of the street. So now I'm pointing the readers in a particular direction, showing them a coffee shop at the corner of the street. And then I continue. It had a crooked signboard that read Coffee Central. I'm giving a very specific detail there. It had a crooked signboard. I might come back to that later in my story and explain why it was crooked, or I might just leave it out. It's just one of those um, factors in the story that may not lead anywhere, or they might lead somewhere. Anything, you just describe it, okay, any way you want. Use similes like as loud as thunder, as blue as the ocean, and you don't have to know all these similes that are meant for you to learn by heart. You can use your own similes, make something up. For example, if I say as dark as what? Think of something that you can relate to. What in your life has been very dark, according to you? As dark as what? According to me, I would think of something like this: as dark as a cave in the Amazon. Maybe you'll think of something else that's darker. Maybe a child would say, as dark as my bedroom when everyone in the house has gone to sleep. Something like that. Think of similes, they make the story so much more interesting. Use a lot of interesting adjectives describing words. Consider using a thesaurus to help you. A thesaurus is different from a dictionary because a dictionary gives you the meanings of words, but a thesaurus will give you synonyms. That means words that are similar in meaning to a word that you are looking for. So that instead of using that particular word all the time, you can change the word, you can use something different, make things more interesting. In doing so, you will get ideas of other words that you can use instead of the ones you use all the time. For example, instead of the word huge, which people are prone to using all the time, you can write titanic or humongous. Okay? Adjectives help in a big way. I'll give you an example how. Now, suppose I was writing a sentence like this. He was walking down the road towards the house. Okay, it tells a story. He was walking down the road towards the house. But now, what if I add some adjectives there before the nouns? Which are the nouns? Road and house. Now, I'm going to add one adjective. Listen to the difference. The first sentence I read to you was, he was walking down the road towards the house. Now, with the adjective, he was walking down the lonely road towards the dark house. Makes better sense, more descriptive. He was walking down the lonely road towards the dark house. Now I'm going to say it again with another adjective. So I'm going to give two adjectives for each noun and see how much better it becomes. He was walking down the lonely brick road towards the dark, empty house. Isn't that so much better? This is what adjectives do. They make everything so much more interesting. Now I'm going to read it again, first without any adjective, then with one single adjective for each noun and then with two, and you see what a big difference it makes. He was walking down the road towards the house. He was walking down the lonely road towards the dark house. He was walking down the lonely brick road towards the dark, empty house. So much better, isn't it? Okay, now suppose I'm talking about a man. I can do the same thing. One sentence would be, she saw a man in the store. It does describe what she saw, no doubt. She saw a man in the store. Now the two nouns are man and store. Let's try and add adjectives to those. She saw a tall man in the departmental store. Isn't that so much better? What if I had two adjectives for each of the nouns? She saw a tall, handsome man in the huge departmental store. Isn't that so much better? I'm going to read them again, first without any adjectives, then with one, and then with two. She saw a man in the store. She saw a tall man in the departmental store. She saw a tall, handsome man in the huge departmental store. I'm sure you agree it makes a huge difference to your writing. Then use interesting phrases and idioms. There are so many that you can use. Maybe you can Google them and see what you're comfortable using and keep them handy so that you can use them. Phrases and idioms make stories more interesting. For example, instead of saying he got into trouble, you can say he was in hot water. Doesn't it sound so much better? Or instead of saying she told everyone about it, you could say she let the cat out of the bag. Better, isn't it? There are so many more idioms like see eye to eye, which means that you agree with someone. So I could say a sentence like this: I see to eye with her, and hence we always go shopping together. Or you can also say, we never see eye to eye, and hence we don't hang out together. Another one would be once in a blue moon. Once in a blue moon means something that happens very rarely. So I eat Chinese food once in a blue moon. Okay. You could also say add fuel to the fire, which means that someone is very angry about something and you go and say something to the person to make him even angrier. For example, my father was very angry with me for coming home late that night. I added fuel to the fire by telling him that I had failed my math test. Followed? Sitting on a fence, for example. Sitting on a fence means that you have not decided which way you want to go. Do you want to do this or do you want to do that? You cannot decide, so you're sitting on a fence. So, how would I use that in a sentence? I would say, I did not know whether I should take up a career in designing or in marketing. I am still sitting on a fence. Okay? Doesn't mean literally sitting on a fence, but you get the idea now. Okay, make the start of the story very interesting. When your readers pick up a story to read, they are going to get the first impression of your story by seeing how you have started it, right? They're not going to bother to flip the pages and see the middle of the story or the end of the story first. They're going to look at the beginning first. And if the beginning is good, if they have, it has captured their interest, then they're going to want to read more. Okay, then the rest of your writing depends on how well you have expressed yourself with all the idioms and phrases and similes and descriptive words and everything else. And of course, you have to make the end spectacular too. Let's start with the beginning. How do you make that interesting? You can start in several different ways. You don't have to start every story the same way that you start the previous one. But usually, writers do have a particular style and they do it the same way, but you can change, you can do it the same way. It all depends on you. You're the writer. Pick a style that suits you. For example, you can start by using direct speech like this. He said, "This is the worst road I have ever been on." And after that, continue with the story. You can write a story like a diary, like this. Sunday, 24/3/1902. It was dreary. The sun had not come out yet. And then continue. Or you can begin with a short verse. The spider knew the way to spin. Here is where my tale begins. Start a story after that. Well, I have a few more examples to give you from a lovely storybook that one of my students gifted me. It is so interesting. It's 50 greatest short stories, and they're all my favorites. So I'm going to read you the beginning of The Last Leaf by O. Henry. See how he starts his story. I'm sure many of you have heard of the story. It's a very famous one, a very sad one, beautiful story, very well written. But see how he starts. In a little district west of Washington Square, the streets have run crazy and broken themselves into small strips called places. Seen that? I'll give you another example from the same book. It's called The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe. I was sick, sick unto death with that long agony. And when they at length unbound me, and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dread sentence of death, was the last of distinct accentuation which reached my ears. Let me give you one more example. This is from Dracula's Guest by Bram Stoker. When we started for our drive, the sun was shining brightly on Munich, and the air was full of the joyousness of early summer. Just as we were about to depart, Herr Delbruck came down bareheaded to the carriage, and, after wishing me a pleasant drive, said to the coachman, still holding his hand on the handle of the carriage door, "Remember, you are back by nightfall." Okay? So that's what I mean by having an interesting beginning so that you can capture the interest. Now, if you read that one, the Dracula story, the beginning of that, wouldn't you want to know what happened next? I'm sure you would. The end of the story has to be unexpected. An unexpected ending will capture the reader's interest most of all. Okay, so I'll give you examples from my favorite book again. So let's see how the story, The Last Leaf, ends. This is how it ends. They couldn't imagine where he had been on such a dreadful night. And then they found a lantern, still lighted, and a ladder that had been dragged from its place, and some scattered brushes, and a palette with green and yellow colors mixed on it. And look out of the window, dear, at the last ivy leaf on the wall. Didn't you wonder why it never fluttered or moved when the wind blew? Ah, darling, it's Burnon's masterpiece. He painted it there the night the last leaf fell. Very sad story, beautifully written. Okay, now I'll tell you how To Build a Fire by Jack London ends. There were no signs of a fire to be made. Never in the dog's experience had it known a man to sit like that in the snow and make no fire. As the evening grew darker, its eager longing for the fire mastered it. With much lifting of its feet, it cried softly. Then it flattened its ears, expecting the man's curse, but the man remained silent. Later, the dog howled loudly, and still later, it moved close to the man and caught the smell of death. This made the animal back away. A little longer it delayed, howling under the stars that leaped and danced and shone brightly in the cold sky. Then it turned and ran along the trail toward the camp it knew, and where there were the other food providers and fire providers. Okay, those are examples of how one can end a story. So, all the best for your writing adventures, and thank you for watching this lesson. I wish you all the best in every creative writing project you do. And if you need any help from me, I'd be glad to help in any way I can. Just tell me in the comments below. Okay? Until next time, cheerio.